It all began on a crisp autumn morning in the quiet, unassuming town of Silver Hollow. A beloved golden retriever named Max had started displaying peculiar behavior that baffled his owners, the Thompson family. Max had always been a loyal, good-natured dog with an impeccable sense of routine. But over the past week, his daily walks near the old Willowbrook Cemetery had taken a strange turn. Every time the Thompsons passed the wrought iron gates of the cemetery, Max would freeze, his ears pricking up as if he had caught a distant sound that no one else could hear. His nose would twitch furiously, and then, as though possessed by some invisible force, he would bolt toward a specific corner of the graveyard, dragging his leash and barking with an intensity they had never seen before. The family initially dismissed it as a random quirk, but as the days passed, Max's behavior grew increasingly erratic. He refused to leave the cemetery, whining and scratching at the earth near an old, weathered headstone. The headstone in question bore a name so faded that it was almost unreadable, but the date, 1823, was still faintly visible. It belonged to a grave that appeared untouched for centuries, overgrown with ivy and surrounded by a sense of eerie stillness. Max's obsession with this spot soon became a source of concern for the Thompsons, especially when the dog's behavior began to escalate. He stopped eating his meals, pacing restlessly at home as if the graveyard's pull extended even beyond its gates. At night, he whimpered and scratched at the front door, desperate to return to the spot. The family consulted their veterinarian, who found no physical issues with Max and suggested that perhaps the dog had merely picked up the scent of a buried animal. But the Thompsons weren't convinced. There was something unexplainably odd about Max's fixation. The matter took a darker turn when neighbors began noticing the dog's antics during their own visits to the cemetery. Rumors started swirling around town. Some suggested that Max's behavior was a sign of an unquiet spirit. Others speculated that the grave might hide something sinister, possibly a secret from the town's murky past. Old-timers recalled stories about Willowbrook Cemetery, tales of disappearances and strange noises that had circulated for decades but were always dismissed as folklore. As curiosity mounted, a few brave souls decided to follow Max's lead and investigate the grave in question. Equipped with flashlights and shovels, the group ventured into the cemetery one misty evening to examine the spot Max seemed so determined to uncover. Under the pale glow of the moon, they began to dig, their tools scraping against the hard-packed earth. Max, despite being restrained by a leash, barked and howled incessantly, his paws clawing at the dirt in a frenzied attempt to join the excavation. The deeper they dug, the more palpable the tension became. The grave appeared to have been undisturbed for centuries. Yet as the layers of soil were removed, an unusual smell began to waft from the earth. It wasn't the scent of decay. It was something far more peculiar, almost metallic. One of the diggers, a local historian named Eleanor Carter, paused and wiped her brow, her voice trembling as she asked if anyone else felt the ground vibrating faintly beneath their feet. The group exchanged uneasy glances, but they pressed on, driven by a mix of curiosity and fear. Finally, their shovel struck something solid. At first, they assumed it was the coffin's lid, but as they brushed away the remaining dirt, they discovered a layer of iron plating that seemed to have been deliberately placed over the coffin. The craftsmanship was intricate, with strange symbols etched into the metal that none of them recognized. Eleanor, who had studied ancient languages and symbols during her university days, took a closer look and gasped. The symbols were not merely decorative. They were protective wards, the kind used in folklore to seal away something dangerous. By now, Max's barking had reached a fever pitch, and the group's unease turned to outright fear. What had they stumbled upon, and why had Max been so insistent on leading them to this grave? One of the diggers suggested they stop and call the authorities, but others argued that they were too far along to turn back now. Against their better judgment, they decided to pry open the iron plating and reveal what lay beneath. Max's owner, Sarah Thompson, tried to calm the dog, but even she couldn't deny the sense of foreboding that hung in the air. As the group worked together to lift the iron sheet, the ground beneath them seemed to groan in protest. A low, guttural sound that sent shivers down their spines. When the plating was finally removed, they found themselves staring at an old wooden coffin, its surface riddled with scratches as though something inside had tried to claw its way out. The group hesitated, their flashlights illuminating the coffin as their breaths hung in the chilly night air. Eleanor whispered a warning, her voice trembling. "We shouldn't open it," she said. "There's a reason it was sealed like this." But before they could decide their next move, Max broke free from Sarah's grip and lunged at the coffin, barking furiously. His claws scraped against the wood, and in that moment, the group's fear gave way to a collective determination. They had to know what was inside, not just for their own curiosity, but to understand why Max had been so obsessed with this grave. And so, with trembling hands, they began to loosen the nails that held the coffin shut, unaware that their actions were about to uncover a secret that would change their lives forever. The decision to open the coffin was not made lightly. As the group stood around the grave, their flashlights casting long shadows on the disturbed earth, a sense of dread hung heavy in the air. Sarah Thompson, Max's owner, clutched the dog's leash tightly, though Max's barking and frantic pawing at the coffin's surface made it nearly impossible to hold him back. Eleanor Carter, the historian, hesitated, her voice trembling as she warned again of the protective wards etched into the iron plating they had removed moments earlier. "These symbols aren't just decoration," she said. "They're warnings. Whoever buried this wanted to make sure it stayed sealed." But her caution was overpowered by the group's overwhelming curiosity and Max's inexplicable urgency. With a shared glance of apprehension, they began the painstaking process of prying open the coffin. Using crowbars and tools they had brought for the excavation, they worked to loosen the rusted nails that held the coffin shut. The wood was old and brittle, crumbling at the edges as they applied force. Every creak of the coffin's hinges sent chills down their spines, and the smell emanating from within grew stronger, a strange, metallic odor that none of them could identify. Finally, with a groan of protest, the lid gave way, and the group collectively held their breath as they peered inside. What they found defied all expectations. The coffin was not filled with decayed remains as they had anticipated. Instead, it contained a series of strange objects, each more baffling than the last. At the center was a large, leather-bound book with pages that appeared to be made of some kind of animal hide, its cover embossed with the same cryptic symbols that had been etched into the iron plating. Around the book were various trinkets and artifacts: a rusted dagger, a string of beads that looked like they were made of bone, and a small, intricately carved wooden box. The box's lid was slightly ajar, revealing what appeared to be a collection of yellowed teeth. Sarah gasped, stepping back instinctively, while Eleanor leaned in closer, her scholarly curiosity overpowering her fear. "This is incredible," she murmured. "These items, they're ancient. But why would someone bury them like this?" The group's attention was quickly diverted by Max, who had gone eerily silent. The dog stood rigid, his nose pointing toward the book, his body trembling as though he were both drawn to and repelled by it. Sarah tried to coax him away, but Max refused to budge, letting out a low, almost mournful whine. It was then that Eleanor noticed something even more unsettling. The pages of the book were blank. At least, they appeared to be at first glance. But as she held her flashlight closer, faint lines of text began to emerge, written in a language she couldn't recognize. The letters seemed to shift and shimmer on the page, as though alive. Eleanor's hands shook as she stepped back, unsure whether to close the book or examine it further. The tension in the air thickened as the group debated their next move. Some argued that the artifact should be left untouched and the grave resealed, while others believed that the items held important historical value. Eleanor, despite her unease, could not resist the pull of the book's mysterious text. "If we leave this here, we may never know what it means," she said. "It could be a piece of history or a warning. Either way, we can't ignore it." Her words were met with reluctant agreement, and the group began carefully removing the artifacts from the coffin. However, their actions seemed to disturb something unseen. The ground beneath their feet trembled slightly, and a faint, low hum filled the air. Max let out a series of sharp barks, his gaze darting toward the surrounding darkness as if sensing an invisible presence. Eleanor's flashlight flickered, and she glanced nervously at the book in her hands. "We need to be careful," she warned, her voice barely above a whisper. This grave was sealed for a reason. As they packed the artifacts into a cloth-lined box for transport, a sudden gust of wind swept through the cemetery, extinguishing their flashlights. Panic set in as the group scrambled to relight them, their hands trembling. When the lights finally came back on, they noticed something chilling. The coffin, though empty, now bore fresh scratches on the inside of its lid, as if something had tried to escape. The metallic odor in the air grew stronger, almost suffocating, and Max's barking turned to a low, menacing growl. Eleanor looked at the group, her face pale. "We've disturbed something," she said, "and I don't think it's happy." Eleanor's trembling hands hovered over the book as she struggled to comprehend the shifting letters on its pages. The text seemed to rearrange itself with every passing second, forming words and symbols that defied any known language. The group stood in a tense semicircle, their faces illuminated by the pale light of their flashlights. Max's low growls broke the silence, his eyes fixed on the book with an intensity that unsettled everyone. Sarah instinctively tightened her grip on the leash, but the dog refused to budge, his focus unshaken. Eleanor finally closed the book, her voice shaking as she announced, "This isn't just a relic. It's some kind of containment. A seal, maybe? I think opening it could be dangerous." Despite Eleanor's warning, the group's curiosity remained insatiable. They examined the other artifacts, each item adding another layer to the mystery. The dagger, though rusted, still held an ominous gleam, its hilt engraved with the same cryptic symbols as the book and the iron plating. The beads, now identified as human bone, were arranged in a pattern that suggested some kind of ritualistic purpose. The small wooden box containing teeth was perhaps the most unnerving of all, its contents rattling softly as if stirred by an unseen force. Every item seemed to point to a darker, more sinister story, but none of them could piece it together. The tension among the group grew, their imaginations running wild as they debated the purpose of these artifacts and the grave's peculiar sealing. It was Max who provided the next clue. The dog's growling turned to frantic barking, his paws clawing at the dirt near the coffin's base. When the group followed his lead, they discovered a hidden compartment beneath the coffin, its lid marked with a crude engraving of what appeared to be a wolf or a dog, a clear reference to Max's inexplicable connection to the grave. With no small amount of trepidation, they pried open the compartment to reveal yet another artifact, a small vial filled with a dark, viscous liquid that shimmered unnaturally in the flashlight beams. Eleanor's face turned pale as she examined the vial. This isn't just an artifact. It's alchemical, something powerful, and possibly dangerous. As the group tried to make sense of their findings, the ground beneath them trembled. A low, guttural noise, like a distant growl, emanated from somewhere deep below. Panic set in, and several members of the group suggested resealing the grave immediately. But Eleanor, now visibly shaken, argued that the artifacts and the vial needed to be studied. "If we leave this here, we may be ignoring something that could threaten more than just this town," she insisted. The debate grew heated until a loud crack interrupted them. The ground split open, and a rush of cold air erupted from the fissure, carrying with it an eerie whisper that none of them could quite understand. Max's reaction was the most alarming. The dog's eyes seemed to glaze over as he stopped barking and began to whimper. Sarah knelt beside him, trying to comfort him, but Max remained fixated on the fissure. Then, without warning, he lunged forward, snapping his leash, and bolted into the darkness. The group shouted after him, their voices trembling with fear, but Max disappeared into the shadows. Sarah was inconsolable, but Eleanor's attention remained fixed on the fissure and the vial in her hands. "It's not over," she whispered, more to herself than to anyone else. In the days that followed, the town of Silver Hollow was gripped by a palpable sense of unease. Strange occurrences plagued the area. unexplained power outages, chilling howls in the night, and sightings of shadowy figures near the cemetery. Max never returned, and Sarah's grief turned to determination as she vowed to uncover the truth behind his disappearance. Eleanor, meanwhile, delved deeper into her research, piecing together the fragments of a story that spanned centuries. She discovered references to an ancient cult that believed in trapping malevolent spirits within objects, sealing them away to prevent destruction. The symbols on the artifacts matched those described in old manuscripts, and the vial, she realized, was the key, a final measure to contain whatever evil the coffin's occupant represented. The group's discovery became a closely guarded secret, shared only among those who had been present that night. But secrets have a way of unraveling. Whispers spread through the town, and soon outsiders arrived, drawn by tales of cursed artifacts and buried mysteries. Eleanor's research revealed a chilling conclusion. The grave they had disturbed was not meant to honor the dead, but to imprison something far worse. The artifacts were not treasures but tools of containment, and by removing them, the group had unknowingly broken the seal. As Silver Hollow descended into chaos, Eleanor and Sarah led a desperate effort to contain the spreading darkness. But the damage had been done. Whatever had been sealed in that coffin was now free, and its influence was growing stronger with each passing day. The final straw came when the fissure in the graveyard erupted once more, unleashing a torrent of energy that engulfed the cemetery. In its wake, the land was left barren, and the town's residents fled, leaving Silver Hollow a ghost town. For Sarah, Eleanor, and the others, the events of that night became a haunting memory, a reminder of the dangers of curiosity and the price of uncovering secrets that were meant to remain buried. Max's fate remained a mystery, but Sarah held on a hope that he had not been lost forever, that perhaps, in some way, he had become a guardian against the darkness they had unleashed.